I grew up in a town called Pharr in South Texas, and that's Pharr as in Pharr, but also far as in really, really far away. My house was surrounded on 3 sides by grapefruit orchards, and to go anywhere we had to drive past horses grazing in the paddocks. I was the smallest kid in my class. I was the nerdiest kid in my class, and I was definitely the gayest kid in my class. Basically, I was a walking, talking, moving target strapped to an overstuffed backpack. Pharr was also my dad's hometown, and my dad did such a great job of showing me unconditional love. So he was a man of very few words, but one of the ways that he would always show love was just this adoring look through his steely blue eyes. And I wouldn't have made it out of school without his love, and I wouldn't have made it out of Pharr, Texas, without his love. So at 27 years old, I was living my best life in the gayest city, according to US Census data, in the country. I was dating a really, really, like the hottest guy ever, and and I was working in the Obama administration, which was a huge honor, yeah. And I was also a university professor at nighttime. So all in all, like a pretty like epic life. And my dad, who was so proud of me, was due to visit me later that year, and he was bringing his sister, my Aunt Dolores, and her husband, my Uncle Frank. And my Uncle Frank also happened to be my dad's best friend of over 40 years. So you can imagine they were pretty close. A few years earlier, Uncle Frank had a cardiac arrest and experienced severe brain damage. And my aunt and my dad took great pride in their ability to take care of him together. And the 3 of them, for decades, were this airtight triad who never failed to show love and support for each other and the whole family. And I was just so proud that they were coming to visit me, and I just couldn't wait to show them off to my friends. One morning, just a few weeks before they were due to visit, my dad called. And in the middle of the night, he got up to use the toilet. He had a back spasm, fell on the floor, and laid there helpless until my brother showed up and got him back into bed. And my dad never really got out of bed again. A few months passed by, and my Aunt Dolores called me, and she said, "You should probably come home. We're expecting some test results, and all of these other things have been ruled out, and we need to be together as a family in this moment." So I fly home, and I'm feeling this paradoxical blend of numb and dread. It felt like I went to sleep for a nap and woke up and I was in free fall, just wondering, how did I get here and what happened to my comfortable bed? I go straight to Dad's house and I walk in the door, and by some miracle, he's able to stand up, and he comes and hugs me, and I'll never forget just the fire of love again in his steely blue eyes. Okay. Within an hour, my Aunt Dolores walks in the door, and rather than carrying the joy of seeing her prodigal nephew, she's carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders because she's about to deliver some devastating news to the family, which is my dad has incurable stage 4 metastatic bone cancer. If you have ever cared for a dying parent, you know that it is one of the hardest things a person will ever do, and also one of the most rewarding things that a person will do. So I decided right then and there that I would fly home every month for the week that he would be in chemo, so I could always go to chemo with my dad. And chemo days were actually really exciting days because we got to leave the house. The nurses were really inspiring, and the steroids from the chemo gave my dad this boost of energy. So he could be more alert, more present, he had more appetite, he was actually hungry. We could even get takeout and go to restaurants, and that was just really exciting. If your life was really small, takeout's a big deal. And it also gave him, he was himself when he was on these steroids for that small window of time. So he could tell his stupid dad jokes, every time someone would fart, he would say, "What did you say your name was?" Yeah. For some reason, the only show that he could stay awake for was Downton Abbey. So during that time, we became intimately acquainted with the Crowley family and their servants. And there was no shortage of crappy daytime TV. So in part as an homage to him for Halloween that year, my friends and I decided to dress in drag as the cast to The View. And I, of course, was Elizabeth Hasselbeck, because if you put a wig on me, I give you privileged white women vibes, right away. Sorry. Dad's condition deteriorated to the point where he needed to move in with my Aunt Dolores, who now bore the responsibility of caring for her dying husband and her dying brother at the same time. And my dad was very sharp still, but couldn't walk. And my Uncle Frank could walk, but was missing a few marbles. So together, they were a whole person. And my dad was nicknamed Frank's babysitter because he could keep Frank out of trouble. But it also gave my dad a reason to live, because he could contribute by looking after Uncle Frank. It was a really interesting time in my life, flittering back and forth between Washington, D.C., where things were really vibrant and exciting and developing, and then going back to far Texas, where things were in rapid decomposition. It was the most confronting human experience I'd ever had up to that point. And it was the best of times and the worst of times, all rolled into the timeline of my life so far. One morning, I flew in, and Frank's bed was now in the center of the living room, which is a common hospice practice. And he was unconscious and breathing very, very slowly. So on that warm February day with light filtering through the blinds, he took his last few breaths and peacefully transitioned out of this life. And that is when I got really, really worried for my dad. After Frank's funeral, I flew back to Washington, D.C., and Dad stopped taking my phone calls because he was too weak and too depressed to answer. So no more dad jokes, no more crappy daytime TV. And my Aunt Dolores has one more difficult phone call to make. And she calls me and she says, "You better come home right away." And she didn't have to say it, but I knew to pack a black suit. When I arrived, he was already unconscious. And I remember thinking, shit, I thought I'd get to have a few more words with him. I thought I would get to see the fire of love in his steely blue eyes one more time. That night, my grandmother sat by his bed praying, and I lied on the other side of the room in a couch, drifting in and out of sleep. In the middle of the night, my grandmother says to me, "Eric, he's gone." I went back to my life in Washington, D.C., but it didn't feel much like living at all. My relationship with the gorgeous man deteriorated very quickly. I would still do things. I'd still go to work. I'd still pay my bills. I'd still go to happy hours and mimosa brunches. But inside, I was dead. I felt cut off from all feeling of unconditional love. I was numb and completely disconnected. And a few years later, I had the opportunity to move to here, to Western Australia. And the feeling of isolation in my heart perfectly matched the isolation of Perth. It was perfect. Leonard Cohen says that everything has cracks in it, and that's how the light gets in. And it wasn't in the middle of the night, but it was in a very dark point in my existence that light once started again to filter in. And my spirit begins to rumble. And I once again, after I don't know how many years, start to recognize the familiar feeling of unconditional love from all of the beautiful people around me that I have met here, from my community, from myself, from Source. And coming back to life is a lot like falling asleep or falling in love. At first, it happens very slowly, and then all at once. And suddenly, I was feeling inspired. I was feeling joy. I was feeling warmth and community. The Perth dawn was breaking, and I was back to life. So these days, in this year actually, in this new skin, right, this renewed sense of living, this year I enrolled in nursing school, and I hope to work in palliative care one day, because I realize that I am most alive when I am at the edges of life. Thank you.